So I get emails all the time, folks out there, where I get people pitch me books to read. And I, as you guys all know, I'm an author myself. I like to read. I'm a voracious reader. I love this kind of stuff. And then a book comes across my desk. I can't say that I'm an old person. Comes across my desk that's a little more than just read it. It's actually something that has to do with something that I'm very passionate about, which is veterans. It's something I am big and passionate about. Hi, welcome to In Between the Pages with James Lott Jr. I'm James Lott Jr. As you see, my guest is sitting here. I'm going to introduce him right now, but I want to tell you about this book first. The book is about going on a journey to all 23 of America's overseas World War I and World War II cemeteries managed by the American Battle Monuments Commission, which I knew nothing about. So this is something new for me. The book, I mean, it's beautiful. We're going to show you the book in a second. It's beautiful. I got it in my hands. It includes images with more than 50 biographies of people who died during those wars and have still not made it home. Their bodies are not here. So he says from Normandy to Manila, from Tunisia to Florence, and from Luxembourg to Provence. This book honors those who sacrificed everything to ensure our freedom. One of the books, sir, it's called Never Home, Remembering the Military Heroes Who Have Never Returned. My new friend, Richard Sherman. Hi, Richard.
Good morning, James. How are you, sir?
First of all, thank you for your service because you're a Navy veteran. So thank you for your.
Thank you.
I appreciate. I think I told you in our initial talks. I'm like whatever veterans one should get. I've been very open about that. I come from a military family, and I was not in the military myself. I come from a law enforcement family. I just think just when it comes to military, it's like I just think you served our country. You need to whatever you get, you should have. So
well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the strong support. And as I'd like to remind folks, the military service member makes a tremendous sacrifice, but as this book also highlights, so do their families as well.
And so here's the thing. So then you have this book. I said came across. You came with my emails, and when I got it in my hands, I sent you a message. It's beautiful. First of all, it's beautiful. Gordy, you're a professional photographer also. So folks, it's a gorgeously photographed book. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, sir.
But it's a serious subject. And not just you're talking about people who served and died for their service, but their bodies aren't here. They're not with their families. So that's even a harder, I mean, that's just, it's one of those things like somebody going missing, so to speak, and then that's it. You just don't. So what prompted you to do this type of subject?
Yeah, it's an interesting and a long story, but I also, before jumping into that, I think it's also important to highlight that there are in these 23 World War I and World War II overseas cemeteries, there are some 207,000 plus individuals that are memorialized. Around 78,000 of them actually, we haven't even recovered their bodies. I mean, they're missing. They're on the walls of the missing. Many of those in blue are Navy colleagues or Marine Corps colleagues. Their bodies were never recovered, and so they're memorialized on the wall of the missing. And of course, the ABMC, the American Battle Monuments Commission, which is an extraordinary organization of our federal government, does an amazing job managing these cemeteries as well as other cemeteries and monuments. But you can follow them on social media when they're able to recover or identify a body. It's a big deal. And so, yeah, it's a very moving topic. How I got started with it, you mentioned, James, military family, military experience. I think the experience of those who went before us in the military are never really far from our minds, and those who are now currently serving are really never far from our minds. While we're speaking here, there are men and women and individuals in harm's way. And so, after having done my military service, returned to civilian life, and I was working in a financial services job. And I think the pivotal starting point of this project turns out to be in Canada, in Vancouver, when I got out of an airplane, jumped into a cab, and I met a taxi driver. I tend to chat with the cab drivers. I find that interesting, and he was a Red Army veteran from Ukraine in World War II. Now, if you may recall, in the Second Gulf War, the Americans and the Canadians have a different perspective on that conflict, and the Canadians weren't particularly in support of that combat operations. And so, when I got in the car, I was were chatting a little bit, and I kind of wasn't certain where the conversation was going, and he proceeded to tell me that when he was in World War II, about his experience, being Ukrainian, as we see in, now today, some 17 years later, we see how the Russians and the Ukrainians have quite a significant divide in their cultures and in their views of each other. But he told me that, they fighting for the Red Army against the aggression of the Nazis. In front of them was a horrific enemy that they had to fight through terrible conditions. And behind them were Russians who would beat them and shoot them or mistreat them if they weren't fully engaged constantly in the combat operations. And so the Ukrainians would go 4 or 5 days without receiving any food. And then the American experience happened. The GIs came from the United States, and this is a guy now well into his 80s. A very emotional conversation. I mean, he still could not understand why American young men at the time would come to the Ukraine to fight alongside them. It was, even in his 80s, he really just was overwhelmed, just trying to understand why we would leave the safety and security of our homes thousands of miles away, thousands and thousands of miles from danger, to help the Ukrainians fight the aggression of the Nazis in World War II. And when the Americans came as well, he was equally as emotional about how generous the American troops were. There's an old saying that firepower wins battles, but logistics wins wars. And here he was trying to survive, eating once every 4 or 5 days, and the American troops came and they had daily rations. They ate every day. And not only did they eat every day, and this gets a bit emotional for me, but they shared their food with the Ukrainian soldiers, so the Ukrainian soldiers could eat. And man, a seed was planted, and it just bounced back and forth in my mind for years. I was working a financial job, a services job. I switched careers in 2010, 2011, went to school for photography and became a professional photographer. But behind all this was this thought: is how do you thank these individuals? And I'm never going to have a chance to meet them. They're gone. They've perished in war. And in 2017, I started to work with the industry's top photography book consultant, a woman named Mary Virginia Swanson, who has been a guiding force in this project since before inception, about this concept, this idea of embarking on a journey of gratitude, bringing the camera gear along with me, and bringing others so that they can experience this journey of gratitude right next to me. And so in 2018, I started that process of traveling to the overseas military cemeteries. As you mentioned, there's 23 related to World War I and World War II. And it took 6 years. We lost some time with COVID, as everybody knows. And it encompassed 8 trips, 3 continents. And as you mentioned, from the various different countries, from Luxembourg to Tunisia and over to Manila, et cetera. And it was an extraordinary experience. So I think, to answer your question succinctly, I think the seed really was planted in 2007, having met that Ukrainian cab driver in Vancouver, and to experience his emotion, his gratitude was infectious. And I started to consider how I could take this one step forward and thank these individuals who sacrificed everything.
One of the things that we, I think certain generations, I think after me, because I'm Gen X, after me, don't really look in the past anymore. And it's interesting because you always say you should look in the past, should honor those who came before you, that who laid the groundwork for you to have what you have today. And I know that the greatest generation, as they're called, and even the silent generation, as they're called, the ones who were in World War I and World War II, those were major wars that were fought and won and lost for some people. It's very cool you decided to go that far back because of that gentleman and say, let's see what those stories are from 80 years ago, 90 years ago. That's even 100 years ago. That's amazing. That's really amazing. It's very cool.
Yeah, I know. It is an experience. Like, this book is not a history book. Of course, you can't talk about the wars without getting into the history. And of course, the cemeteries track these major battles, these major battlefronts throughout the wars. But it is a humanist book. It is a story of sacrifice and loss, and it's the stories about the individuals. And so while there are wonderful books on the bookshelf, for example, Rick Atkinson wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning trilogy on the wars. There's Ambrose. There's all these wonderful history books. This book is really about the human toll and the human sacrifice of war, and so in that respect, it's very complementary to the historical narratives about the American experience in both those wars.
Yeah, we have a very popular podcast in my network called Ernie Pyle's World War II Museum Podcast. Ernie Pyle, of course, is a famous journalist. He was like no nonsense down there. I know you know who he is, of course. Very popular podcast for us. And we actually work with the museum in Indiana. Also, he has ties in New Mexico. There's schools, Ernie Pyle School. And so it's funny. So speaking of just talking about that, he brought the human side also. His articles, the human side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, embedded reporter. I've read two of his books, and again, it was the individual, right? I mean, if you've not read Pyle, you can buy them for a couple pennies on used bookstores. But the extraordinary stories of the average fighting man in combat and what that experience was like, and then he was very much of a humanist. I mean, he would put people's hometowns and street addresses in his book, where they came from, and that was important to him. And I read Pyle. I started reading Pyle well after the book project had started, but I think they're kind of fall into this very similar genre, which is the human side and the human toll of war.
That's what I get. So, but folks, we do have a podcast. Listen to it. It's called Ernie Pyle Museum World War II Podcast. After you find your podcast. Again, I'm all about helping veterans and stuff, so I'm all about that. But anyway, so for you, because you traveled to these places personally, you went to these places, photographed. Did you feel what kind? No, let me ask the question this way: what did you feel when you visited some of these places? That's the question. What did you when you visited places?
James, great. This is a great question, right? And I think it'll take me a few minutes to answer that, but the answer is, what did I feel? And I was going to say, sort of off the cuff, yes. I mean, I felt that, right? And so photography. If you give me a second to just try these two concepts, photography can be multivariate. Like, so we have documentary photography, the experience of war, and we see artillery or losses, and then we have photography that's art, and it tries to describe for us something that we don't really necessarily have a word for or a phrase for, right? And so this book is structured to follow an emotional journey that anyone would take, that I took, that my wife took, that my sister took, that you would take, that anyone would take when they go to these cemeteries, whether it be Normandy or the Somme or Netherlands or wherever it might be. And so the experience and the book follows that emotional experience, generally starts out affirmative. I don't, again, there's not a specific word, but I'll give you a collection of words: honor, respect, dignity, heroes, right? These words, these nouns and adjectives of positive affirmative experience when you walk through the gates of one of these. And, it's like walking for me, it was like walking into the Hall of Fame. Like, these are my heroes. These are the folks that I've read about and I've always wanted to meet. So the first section of the book, it generally is affirmative in its imagery: bright, colorful images, soldiers in beautiful dress uniforms, children in the among the headstones, ceremonies, beautiful light, beautiful trees. These cemeteries are immaculate. Like, you will not find a piece of plastic or a cigarette, but they are immaculate. So there's this kind of positive experience in the beginning. And then when you go into one of these cemeteries, after you get through the gates and after you have this overwhelming positive, like, gratitude and feelings of affirmative emotions, you walk among the headstones, and there you start to read the names and you start to see the hometowns and you start to wonder what they were like. And that's a very important experience. Of course, that led to chapter 2 in my book, which is these biographies of individuals. I wanted to know more about them. And then chapter 3, the final chapter, is I think at some point emotionally, when you're in these cemeteries, there's a emotional shift where it becomes a bit bleak for you and it becomes dark, right? There's a darkness that you feel. There's a weight that you feel. As you look around left and right, all you see is headstones, and you look forward and back, all you see is headstones. You look up the hill and down the hill. You look down into the valley over the crest of the hill, and all you see is headstones. And you realize that there's the toll that war has taken on these individuals and their families. And so the imagery at the end of the book becomes progressively darker. Rain, clouds, fallen leaves, ice, those type of fog, those type of darker imagery in the back. So I would say the book follows the emotional journey, which is generally, there's a positive feeling to go to them, and it's a very warm feeling to walk through the gates of one of these cemeteries. And then at some point, though, I think that emotion turns very dark and very sad. And I will say that virtually, I've gone to 23 cemeteries, a couple of them, twice, Normandy twice, Netherlands twice, etc. When people leave the cemeteries, almost everyone will turn and look behind them. I mean, there's just like this kind of this weight to this experience, and they tend to look back behind them before they walk out the gates. And I think that reinforces that kind of transitional experience from positive to you leave somehow transformed by the magnitude of the loss when you walk out the gates, and you're a different person than when you walked in.
On doing this book, has it informed your thoughts on how you'll be remembered?
How I'll be remembered?
The way you think of, it made you start thinking about your own kind of mortality, your own service. Like when the books are written about, so to speak, about you, that make you think about your own, like, wonder how people remember me. Like, what are they going to think? Because as a person, I'm in the public eye, and I see somebody's obituary, I think, when I die, what are they going to say about me? I mean, it made me think of that. So I'm just wondering, because you dealt with a lot of death and history and biography. Also, you were in the Navy. You came out, you came out okay. But I just wonder if it made you think of your own, what they would say about you when you're gone.
Well, I gotta say, I don't think too much about that, right? I mean, I think, great acts are done by many very ordinary people, right? And so, in many respects, because of the evolution of media and how we consume content today, our heroes are often identified for us because of the exposure we have to them through media channels. And so it's a little bit different world than it would be, say, 50 years ago or 40 years ago. And so today's heroes are different than the heroes of the past. And I think about it like, these folks, did incredible jobs, incredible duty, doing something that no one, unless you're insane, would ever want to do, right? They did incredible jobs, and they continued to fight in cold, in dark, in injury, in loss, and they continued to move across the beach. They moved across the hill. They moved up the mountain. And so they did incredible jobs at things that no one would want to do. Whereas today, our heroes are, I think, oftentimes doing things that we all would love to do. I would love to be able to, at 5'8", I would love to be able to dunk a basketball. I never was able to do that. I love basketball. I'd love to, star in a film or something like that, or sing a wonderful song that people love. And so, in terms of my own mortality, I don't know. I guess I would say off the cuff, I would say, I'm just one of 350 million Americans. And I think this project has added a lot to my life, but hopefully I've left the world just a little bit better than it was before I started. And I don't think too much about it, but I don't expect anything grand to be written about my life. Just try to be a good neighbor and a good brother and husband and family member.
Yeah, that's very, very modest of you. Yes, I want great things written about me.
Well, I'll write some, assuming I outlive you. So.
Yeah, exactly. Something. No, I just know because you're dealing. One of the reasons why I ask that question is because you're dealing with death. I mean, your subject is death and the aftermath of death. And so, I guess another question I would ask you is, how did you protect your own emotions as a photographer and writer of this while you're doing this project?
So I would say I don't know that I did very, very much, right? I would say that I felt positive, affirmative emotions and enjoyed those experiences of walking through the gates and being in the company of heroes, and I allowed those emotions to flow through me, and I allowed tears to fall in the fog and in the ice, and just try to be present with that. I do think, because maybe even COVID helped a little bit. I think it would be a tremendous emotional toll to go to 23 cemeteries and photograph them in 6 months or something like that. And so there was time between those. So I think that was the buffer, that was the protection of the emotion, from being overwhelmed with all the magnitude of losses, just because, months would go by, and between the photographic experiences in each of those cemeteries.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. That actually makes sense. Yeah, 'cause you did all in 3 weeks. You're doing all these. I mean, yeah, a little much.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was every spring. What has been some reactions you've gotten from the families you talk to?
Yeah, that's been a wonderful experience, right? So, of course, it's hard to access World War One families.
I would say it must be really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, very difficult. But the World War II experiences have been very positive. I wish I could have some more of those experiences. I've been in touch with Frank Tester. Frank Tester his dad was Glenn Tester. So Glenn was one of three brothers who were killed in 3 consecutive years. And their mother received telegrams. Can you imagine that, right? 3 consecutive years, that each year she got a telegram that one of her sons had died. Well, of the three brothers, only one had a son. Glenn Tester had a brother, and Glenn's son Frank was, I think, a year and a half old or something to that effect when his father passed away. So, he shared some imagery, and we've had a chance to chat a little bit about the family and their experience. Even just going back after the book has been published, Frank is now, I think, 80 or so, and it's remarkable. He just wants to meet his dad. He just wants to meet his dad. I imagine living 80 years of your life and wondering and thinking, what was my dad like? And I'd love to meet my dad. And so that's very moving for me. Joe Little Squirrel was a Native American who passed away, and his great nieces are still in the Oklahoma, northern Texas region, and they've been happy. I guess happy is kind of they've been pleased that their family member has been remembered by name, and that not just remembered as a statistic. And so, those are a couple that come to mind. There's others as well, but I think, generally speaking, they keep their memory of their family, their lost family member, their lost military member alive. And I think they like to know that there's a collective, James Lott, Richard Sherman, the American Battle Monuments, that there's a collective of people who are as passionate about keeping the name of their lost loved one alive as they are. And I think it's been a very nice communal experience, learning about their families and their experiences. And I think if I put words in their mouths, I think they feel positive or helped by knowing that there are strangers out there that they don't know that are thinking about and taking care of their graves, like the American Battle Monuments Commission, or doing historical research into their loved ones, or taking photographs and writing brief biographies about them. I think I think they like to know that other people care and are keeping the memories of their family member alive.
Was right. So I was entrusted with my great grandfather's flag and my grandfather's flag. So I have both of them. And so and my stepdad passed away last year suddenly, so my mom has his. But yeah, we had two flags, one for police and one for his service in the Navy. So his daughter got the one for police, and my mother took the one for the Navy. She's forever a Navy wife. She's like, I'm a Navy widow, a Navy wife. So I mean, of course.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry for your loss, and of course, I mean, there's a wonderful community around you that's ready to help. So I'm sorry for that.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's really cool, but I hold those. I have them in the flag boxes, and I have the whole thing. It's really cool to look at that. I'm like, And I didn't know my great grandfather. He was way gone before I was born, but I knew my grandfather. I was close to him. And I actually had him into my 20s, which was kind of crazy. So I was able to have him. So I knew him. But it was kind of cool to see that past. The past, the past is important to us, and we should remember those who came before us. They should never be forgotten. Thanks for this book, Richard. And I'll make sure to show the book again more time. It's called Never Home: Remembering the Military Heroes Who Never Returned. And Richard, where can they find this beautiful book?
Okay, so the easiest way, if you want to buy it directly, it's a URL, neverhomeheroes.etsy.com. Will take you right there. There's two options if you would like a signed copy or an unsigned copy, but neverhomeheroes.etsy.com.
Yes, and I'll put that in the description, of course.
Thank you, sir.
Richard, thanks for your time. Again,
thank you, James.
Thanks for your service again, because this is a service also. What you just did was also for service. And I'm sure that many folks who are not even in the book, it'll remind them of their loved ones who were in World War I and World War II. And so good job. Good job.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and as like between the conversation between my wife and I, was like, part of the problem of the book was stopping, right? Because you get to 54 biographies, and you're like, oh, what about? Because they all really deserve to be named and remembered, right? And like this life happens, and you have to stop at a certain point. But yeah, I mean, this leads us to think about all those who I haven't named and that are still overseas, over 207,000 of them.
Yes. And I'm James Lott Jr., of course. You can go to my website, alotofhelp.com. I'm a certified life coach in 10 areas and certified other things. And you can also check out our page, and between pages of James Lott Jr. on Facebook, where we talk about books of all kinds. I'm all about the book world and reading and authors. Because books, I think, are very important. They're also, they're not going away. They're here still. Nothing's happening to them. There's nothing to worry about. They're here. But thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.